Omar is in Australia as a guest of the Council for Australian-Arab Relations and the University of Sydney's US Studies Centre for a series of performances and to lecture on the intersection of politics and music. And he joins me now. Lovely to talk to you tonight, Omar.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
How, when you were growing up in America, did you reconcile or use music to reconcile the fact that you were there, but you had this deep connection to Syria?
Well, you know, I found that hip-hop had the unique ability to kind of speak to the marginalized voices in society. And halfway through my college career, 9/11 happened. And so I realized very early on that I could use it as a tool to kind of bridge these two seemingly opposed sides of my identity together at a time when it seemed like the media was really bent on tearing them apart. And it turned out to be a very effective way of doing so, and I'm very grateful to have had that opportunity.
Did you feel that there was a greater... Did you feel like you stood out after 9/11? Did you feel personally under attack?
Sure. I mean, both on a personal level and then also, you know, as far as my community was concerned, I saw that taking place. And so I found that, you know, with hip-hop and being able to kind of relate to people and show them, you know, the beautiful side of my culture, the parts of it, the aspects of it that I was really proud of, as opposed to kind of constantly just telling people what I was not, you know, not a terrorist, not an extremist, not this, not that. I thought it was more productive to kind of show them why I was so proud of who I was and where I was from. And that certainly kind of shined through.
14 years later, though, you must look at your country, the country of your heritage. How does that feel to witness this complete collapse and destruction of a culture that is so rich, as you point out?
I mean, it's absolutely devastating, you know, and my heart goes out to all the families who've lost loved ones, who've seen their families torn apart. It's a very difficult thing to watch. At the same time, you know, I feel like there's a certain sense of responsibility for people like myself in these positions who have, you know, followers and fans around the world who want, you know, some kind of way to understand and make sense of what's happening to a certain degree, even though it's really difficult to do so. I'm also hoping that my music and my words can sort of be a rallying point to raise awareness and raise, you know, the humanitarian funds that are needed to help deal with this crisis.
And that has happened so far. Of course, as we know, I mean, we know that there are talks starting tomorrow and there is hope that it will end eventually. How do you think what you do can reach out to those marginalised and, in a way, left to pick up the pieces of the mess that has been created?
You know, that's a really good question. I mean, I hope, first and foremost, that I can inspire this next generation to kind of carry the torch. You know, our culture has been, as you said, you know, ripped apart, but at the same time, we have thousands of years of history and tradition to pull from. And I'm, you know, certain that Syria has been through some dark chapters in the past, but has made it through, and this will hopefully just, you know, be one of those dark chapters that we can look back on and learn from and move forward and build constructively.
We know, of course, that there are so many young people that are at risk of radicalisation, especially that many of those young people you speak of who feel disenfranchised. Is music, hip-hop in particular, a genre that perhaps could reach people ahead of that point of radicalisation?
It could be, but to be honest with you, I think it's really more important at this point to look at the root causes of that, you know, disenfranchisement, that disengagement, that disillusionment. Why does somebody who grows up in Europe, in America, in Australia, feel so disconnected from society and feel some sense of belonging with something like ISIS or, you know, any other form of, I suppose, you know, radicalization, if you will? Those are the things that we have to address in order to really kind of be able to shape some sort of, you know, positive, constructive solution. Hip-hop could maybe offer them a sense of belonging to a certain degree, but that may not be the answer for everyone, and we just have to be willing to have these difficult conversations in a sincere and a constructive way in order to be able to move forward.
When you look back on the Arab Spring, and so many people were watching it with such excitement that perhaps those brutal regimes would come to an end, if we look now right around the region, there are very few places where there has been any emancipation.
Yeah, I'm sorry, is that a question?
Yeah, in the sense of, had you had hope during the Arab Spring that things would change, and how have you observed that?
There was definitely a sense of hope, as you said, you know, and optimism, and I think now, a few years later, we understand perhaps the fatalism of our parents' generation. You know, at the very beginning of these revolutions, many of them were saying, you know, oh, you know, these things are not going to change. This is how it always was and how it always will be. You know, but for someone like me and for a lot of young people around the world, we have way too much to lose. I mean, you know, the overwhelming majority of the population in the Middle East is under the age of 30. And so, you know, rather than look at it as this developmental disaster, we have to see it as an opportunity. And so we have to uplift these young people's voices. I still see so many inspiring things happening, even in Syria, you know, with for example, the White Helmets of Syrian civil defense, people who are risking their lives to save the lives of others, to save the bits of our history that are still there. And so, you know, it gives me little glimmers of hope amidst this, you know, rather dark time that we live in. And at the same time, I think apathy is not an option for someone like me and you know, the millions of people around the world who want to see Syria prosper. It's not okay to just throw your hands up in the air and say we can't do anything about it. The Syrian people depend on us. The Syrian children depend on us, the ones who are literally washing ashore. And so we have to do everything we can to keep the conversation going in a constructive way. And so that's what, you know, what I'm trying to do as best I can. And
of course the tragedy and the necessity for many people who are fleeing Syria is that they may be lost to that country forever, lost in a way to play that kind of role that you talk of.
Perhaps, yes, but at the same time, I think, you know, we also have a long tradition of Syrians abroad who have been able to kind of establish themselves in different places around the world, in South America, North America, Australia, and, you know, have still been able to also give back in a positive way to Syria. And so, you know, the idea of being Syrian doesn't necessarily mean you have to live there to live that out, you know. Syrian culture and heritage can still kind of span the globe. And what I also want to remind people is that Syria is kind of the birthplace of so many aspects of our civilization that we perhaps neglect to mention. And that's, you know, the very first alphabets, the very first musical notations, mosques, churches, synagogues. And so Syrian and being Syrian is something that you can carry with you all over the world, and something that I think every citizen of this earth can kind of feel a bit of a responsibility towards, you know, helping to preserve.
Well, you are doing it in a fine way. We do appreciate you joining us. Thanks, Omar.
Thank you for having me.